fund. I also act as personal advisor to multiple teams and studios. If you Google my name, you might see a story about Snorlax. I continue to use the clout of this to seem relevant to people who don't understand games, but do understand internet culture and memes. So there we are. That is me. So where am I? I'm based in the north of England in Newcastle upon Tyne. It's pretty cold here. It's pretty wet. It's pretty cheap to live. Not as cheap as Romania, I might add, but I prefer the north of England. So I live in the north, but we have team members around the world. So I have a couple in the Philippines, someone down in London, someone up in Canada, soon to be someone in Amsterdam, and someone in South Africa, sorry. So quick bit of context about Robot Teddy and who we work with. It helps a lot to talk about it from that point. So we work with Superhot and have done for a few years. We helped them on the Superhot and Superhot VR, but then we also run the fund that they put together, which has funded games like Frog Detective. We've been working with Innersloth, who make Among Us, which I'm sure you've all heard of, as it's very much a hot property right now. We've been working with them for about 6 weeks, really managing all business and helping them on basically everything. They're a lovely, very small team over in Seattle. We work with companies like Well Told. They're a co-developer. They helped work with Night School, so they're doing some new things, which is pretty exciting. KOWLOON Nights is a fund that I represent, and I help on business and help scouting. Things like Spiritfarer, Scorn, Godfall, and then smaller games like Garden Story and Sea Salt and things like that. Shell Games and Bunny Hug, a couple of other developers. The Bunny Hug game is not announced yet. Oculus, I've been scouting for them for about a year now, although that's coming to an end very soon. And then Bone Loaf is similar to Superhot in that it's a big, successful game that has a long tail. So Gang Beasts will help them on that. Yogscast is another publisher. Mostly Gwen helps them do their thing. IndieBI is a company I'm co-founding with my friend Tom from Superhot that tracks data and allows you to see game sales and so forth. And then finally, I've written Noble Peanut Capital here, but we end up helping a few different investment funds and do some due diligence for them and advice and intros and so forth. So we are a very multifaceted team. We touch a lot of different areas. We are specifically not agents. We don't pick up 20, 30 games at a time and try and sell them to publishers, etc. We prefer long-term engagements with developers, which gives us a pretty unique insight on the games industry, actually. And part of the reason we've managed to be successful is we tend to have context on a lot of different things. I can be talking to Xbox one day about Among Us, which is obviously a certain scale and size of game and popularity, and the next day talking to Xbox about Frog Detective, which is popular, but not anywhere near as popular as Among Us. And so it's very interesting to see the scale of how you can work with publishers and funds and platforms and so on. That's what I'd like to talk to you about today. So housekeeping, there are lots of numbers here, especially the charts can be somewhat confusing. So I'll do my best to break them down. But if anyone has follow-up questions or anything like that, I think there's a live Q&A right now or in the future, depending on when you're watching this. But you can also tweet me. My Twitter account is in the bottom right. I'm happy to answer any questions on there. So this does rely you on having a game that will appeal to publishers. That is the point of this talk. You have a game, it is good enough, the prototype is good enough to appeal to a publisher. What is your step there? How to get a prototype good enough, or how to do budgeting or scoping or approach publishers, that's all for another talk. That's covered by lots and lots of other people. Gwen has a workshop about pitching and how to put pitch decks together, etc. This is just assuming you've got that already and you start to talk deal terms with the publishers. So, like I said, let's assume that you've made a prototype and it's good. Good in inverted commas, because good can mean anything. For me, good prototype means it shows your vision for the final game well enough, but that is always going to be a hand-wavy type of statement. So it's very hard to define exactly what should be in a prototype. A lot of it depends exactly on the game that you happen to be making. So what now? You've got a prototype, it's good. What do you do with it? So you have a few options. You can self-publish, so that's use your own money to pay yourself and contractors and friends and colleagues to make the game, and then also use your own money to spend on marketing, porting, QA, or again, pay yourself to do those things. You can sign with a publisher. Ideally, the publisher pays for your development costs, so they pay your salary, but they also handle everything else. So they handle the QA, the porting, and so forth. Either that's them paying for it outright and then recouping that from the game, or that is them doing it because they have teams in-house who already have this. Most publishers now have a few QA people there to help kind of QA games. Some of them have their own porting houses already, but lots of them still outsource all of this. Project investment. This is not a newer one, but a rarer one. This is where a fund pays for everything. So they will give you a budget to pay yourselves to make the game, but they will also give you a marketing budget, QA budget, a porting budget, PR budget, etc. And you're expected, again, either to do that yourself and pay yourself to do that, or you're expected to use those funds to pay agencies and collaborators and contractors, etc., to come in and do that. But they are very hands off. This is a capital arrangement, money arrangement rather than a publishing arrangement. Or you can get equity investment. So you sell part of your studio in order to get an investment of cash. So you use that money to do everything yourself, or again, pay for collaborators and agencies and so forth. You can combine these. It's combining equity with any of these is much easier than anything else. Combining project investment and a publisher should be easy, but often ends up being very difficult because you start to split the net revenue between too many parties who are used to getting a decent share of it, and it becomes kind of tricky. Today, we're going to focus on signing with a publisher or getting project investment, which is often where people have the most trouble. Equity investment is, again, for an entirely different talk, and it's a different problem set. So I'm a scout for Kowloon Knights. You'll hear the word scout. What actually is a scout? And scouts really exist at every publisher or fund or platform or investor or anything. And a scout doesn't necessarily have to be called a scout. This person could be called developer relations or business development or account management and so forth. So your kind of people at Xbox that you would go to pitch a game to are scouts, really. People like me at Kowloon, I'm a scout. So what is a scout? They ultimately might have a lot of other things on their plate to do, like normal business development or help with marketing, etc. But generally, they sign games. They are the person who decides what games to spend money on or to bring into a portfolio and sign. And ultimately, all scouts have different tastes and agendas. Now, some of it is done through data. And I'll talk about this later. You can quantify to somewhat what your forecast might be, what the model might be, look at comparable games, look at similar Steam tags, etc., look at wish lists. But it also does just come down to different taste and what the agenda of the scout is, as in what the scout is signing a game for. So games should either make money for the company. That's basically what every publisher or investor is looking for. They want games that can ultimately make a profit. Or they can improve the company in other ways. Maybe the investor or publisher signs a much smaller game from a dev that is unlikely to make money, but it tells a message or aligns themselves with the community they want to align to, or it's a charity game or something like that. Same for platforms. They might want to sign a game just because they believe it might not make money specifically, but it will bring people to the platform, that halo effect, right? So here's some of my favorite scouts, just to put like a context on it and what a scout is. So Ben over at Good Shepherd, Felix over at Fellow Traveler, although I believe Felix has left Fellow Traveler now, so I should probably update this slide. John Paulson over at Humble, some of you might have heard of him in the past. Johan Torresson over at Raw Fury and Pavel at 11-bit. Why do I like these people in their role as scouts, as well as them being friends of mine? I like them because they're all honest and they're transparent and they are easy to get a hold of. They all have, Twitter activity. They all have public email addresses. They all, generally they all really have the developers back in mind. And there are lots more. This is just a handful. And like I said, I think the Felix one is out of date, but generally people like this are who you want to talk to when you want to try and get your game funded. So Kowloon Knights, this isn't a Kowloon Knights talk, but I wanted to give some context for kind of how they do it compared to other people. Kowloon Knights are a fund. So if you remember the slide, a few slides back, they do project investment. They are not a publisher. So the green light process for Kowloon Nights is developer will send the materials. That will either be kind of directly to me or Anlu or Astrid, or that will be submitted on the website. A Kowloon Nights review, so the pre-green light I call it, that is basically me opening an email, taking a look, maybe playing the game, watching some videos, looking at materials. I can make a decision at that point if this is worth taking to the rest of the team. As in, do I think this is it fits our goal of scale and team size and so forth? And is this something that I think we should fund and that I would champion internally? If so, we take it to green light, right? I would send it out to the rest of the team. We play games every Wednesday as a team and talk about them. So, that's the Kowloon team and advisors review. That's about 6 of us from Kowloon and, a handful of advisors and other kind of studio heads that we like to keep involved in the process. We let the developers know that evening or the next day if it's a yes or a no, and then we sign a contract. So the pre-green light can take, up to 2 or 3 weeks, I would say, before you kind of get through other emails and people have time to check it and give you feedback and so forth. But as soon as it goes to the wider review, it's a very quick process. It can take maximum 2 weeks, sometimes just a few days, depending on, when you come in the timeline of the week. If you do nothing else and take nothing else from this talk, please learn that you should do your own due diligence on the publisher. Due diligence means just finding out more about them and deciding if this is a path you want to take. So there's no hard and fast rule here. You can ask other developers. You can ask developers that have been signed by that very publisher. That's often a very good way of finding out what it's like to actually work with them. And usually developers are pretty honest, especially on the indie scale. You can ask the publisher straight up, do you mind introducing us to some of your studios? See how they respond. If they won't, it's probably a red flag. Ask your friends. Do some Googling. There's been some pretty high profile publishers that have had a lot of what I would call cancellations in the past couple of years. Do some Googling, see if anything comes up and make your own decisions based on that. But, please just ask other people. Don't go into these things blind. You don't need to. The indie community is generally pretty sharing when it comes to things like this. So I told you about Kowloon's greenlight process. Like, what is a greenlight process, and what does that mean? A green light is, I think, a term from Phil. You give a green light to fund a project. So a green light process is the approval process within a publisher or a fund. So this usually includes some data-oriented thinking. At Kowloon, we do some forecasts. We do recoup and break-even modeling, which is, if the game sells this many units at this price based on our model, how many units before we break even? How many do we need to recoup? And that's an interesting stat because it doesn't really matter on the cost of the game or the, alone. It's not like you can make a $5 million game and recoup faster or recoup slower than a $50,000 game. It's all about how many copies you think you'll sell at what price. So it's a good gauge. If you're looking at 8 million copies before you can recoup, that's pretty rough. If you're looking at 300,000 copies, at least for Kowloon, then that feels okay. Team input and discussion. That's getting a wider input from the rest of the company. The publishers and funds I've worked for in the past definitely kind of have a collaborative way of looking at things. And certainly at Raw Fury, we used to involve the production department and marketing department and things, because ultimately they're the people going to be working on the game, as time goes on. Clarification on budget and game design. There might be some back and forth with the developer asking to clarify parts of the budget, or usually it ends up being making the budget more readable to what we actually want to find out. So rather than, saying that production is going to be 28 months, I actually really want to know kind of what you're paying your producers in general, and if that's around market rate for where you're based, or if you're paying them too little or too much, and just having that context for how a studio treats its employees and how expensive it is definitely helps. A studio in LA is going to cost a lot more than a studio in Rio down in Brazil. And so it's just important that we look at the numbers and just make sure we're not doing the wrong thing. Comparisons, we'll sometimes look at other games, that are similar and what sort of market they have. This is sometimes more helpful when it's something like an indie racing game. There aren't many, right? There's tens, maybe not hundreds, of at least successful ones that I would call. And so looking at how they cut through and what they did and stuff is pretty good. Looking for an action RPG or a pixel art platformer is a lot harder because there's just so many to compare against. So this isn't entirely useful, but sometimes it can give you some estimation of what the market looks like, or at least some comparisons. And then ultimately, there is a healthy amount of gut feel involved in signing games and emotional attachment to the game, but also the team. I've signed games before that I was not 100% convinced about, but I was very convinced by the team and what they've done before, and put the trust in them to be able to figure it out and iron things out. And I've signed games that I absolutely fall in love with, and I've never heard of the team before, and I don't know if they can ship something on time. And so it does come down to gut feeling a lot of the time, which is part of the chaotic frustration with publishing that people have. So some questions to ask yourself always whenever you're approaching this point. What is the funding for? Is it to pay yourself? Is it to do services? Is it to de-risk yourself? Like, do you have your own money, but you want funding because you don't want to spend it all? You might want to buy a house. Like, be very clear with yourself and with your team. What is the funding actually going towards? That doesn't mean, by the way, what is your budget and how much you pay for art? That is really a more meta question about, why do I need this money? Do I need this money? Does the publishers provide any services? I'll go into this later. And if they do provide services, do they add them to your debt? Some publishers don't add marketing spend to your debt, or they recoup that at a different rate. Some publishers don't charge for internal producers. Some do. So, just check some of this stuff. How does recoup work? There's about 10 minutes of content later in the talk about that specifically. So hopefully you'll be able to answer that question once we're done. How many copies does the game need to sell before I start earning money? Probably question number one that you should always be asking yourself, and understand how to figure that out. The way you figure that out, very roughly, is you times your sale price of the game by 0.5. So if you're selling the game for $10, you end up with $5 per copy on average after Steam tax, refunds, discounts, and kind of country pricing. So assume you'll make about 50%, or the game will make about 50% of each on each unit sold. And then how that 50% is split up between you and the publisher, that's the model you have to figure out. And you see how large the number of copies you have to sell before you start making money. For some, that is one copy. At KOWLOON, we start on 70% with the developer starting on 30%. So you make, if the game costs $20 full price and you cut that in half, so the net is $10, you make $3 per copy from day one. Some publishers recoup at a rate of 100%. And so you don't make any money until they've recouped. Some do it even worse. So we'll go into this as well today. Are there milestones? Are these tied to finances? They aren't always. Sometimes milestones are simply guidance. Sometimes payments are just done in tranches, and sometimes you don't get paid until you pass a milestone. So that's something to be clear about. Do you even like the people that you're talking to? This is really important. You're going to work for multiple years with these people potentially. Do you get a good vibe? Like, vibe check, super important. It all sounds complicated. Is it worth it? I don't know. Probably. I think that I have a lot of privilege to be able to sit here and say, only take a deal if it doesn't have this, this, and this. But sometimes the decision is, make the game with a shitty deal, or the game doesn't get made. And I can't tell you what the best answer is to do that. That is entirely up to you. I don't judge anybody for taking bad deals. I would probably take a bad deal myself if it's meant that I could create something for the next 2 years that I otherwise wouldn't be able to. But you have leverage. If you're getting offered deals, you have leverage, because for publishers, finding a game they want to sign is very difficult and takes a long time. And so a publisher usually will not want to let a dev go over small contract changes. You can also use that to go and tell other publishers, hey, we have an offer, can you counter? So I'm going to take you through the usual deal types and what these are. Unless I specify otherwise, all of these involve money paid to the developers for a salary. So a grant is very simple, very easy. I don't know what the landscape looks like in Romania for government grants, but in Australia, the UK, Ireland, and Canada, and so forth, there are grant systems in place, which is very useful. Usually, this is upfront. Sometimes it has milestones, but the total amount does tend to be a little bit lower. So, Phil Victoria gave a grant to Untitled Goose Game, for example. And as you can see, there's not really that many strings attached. They just have to put them in the credits and so forth. So it's helpful. It's nice. You can spend it on R&D. You can offset your own risk. I'm a big fan of grants, but it involves usually government being behind the creation of making games. So here is the first of 4 somewhat confusing charts. And I want to walk through. I think I have a laser tool, maybe. Yes. So net revenue, this is cumulative, which means that, you know, the game at this point has made 100,000. Now it's made 250,000. Now it's made 300,000. This is assuming that the grant is $150,000, and I'll come into that in a minute as to why that's important. Funder share and developer share, view these as, in this situation, the funder is entitled to 0%, so there's nothing in the funder share, and the developer is entitled to 100%. So they have all of the share here. So this is not what they get after the game ships. This is just calculating it first. If after recoup they get 50-50, then this would be split 50-50. Then this is the developer's profit, this is the funder's profit, and this is the recoup coming back. So with a grant, if the grant recouped, it wouldn't be a grant, but if they did want to recoup, you'd want to see 150 at the bottom of here. So let's take you through it. It's very simple for a grant. The game makes 100K, the dev gets 100K. The game makes 250K, the dev gets another 150K. You can see all of the money that comes into the game as net is after Steam, etc., goes to the developer. Very simple, very lovely. So no recoup, but straight percentage share from day one. So what I'm saying there is I'll give you $150,000. I'm not going to have a recoup period. A recoup period is where you take back that $150,000 at a higher rate of normal split. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, here's $150,000. We are going to split from day one, whatever that might be. The funder risks never breaking even here. The revenue split can vary. Superhot Presents, for example, has a 25% split from day one. So we give up to $150,000 at Superhot Presents, which is managed by Gwen on my team. From day one, Superhot takes 25%. That lasts for 3 or 4 years. Very simple, doesn't change. Not very profitable for Superhot by design. It's pretty rare. No panic period after launch because you're making 75% of the revenue from day one. So this is also simple. You can see here, let me find my trusty laser pointer again. So you can see here that the developer share and the funder share are split equally on each side because we're just, again, we're taking that 50%, imagining no recoup, even though there isn't any, this is what's normal. So if we go to, very easy, okay? 50-50 goes to each way. This is not entirely profit because actually the funder has invested $150,000. So technically, the funder, even though they don't have a recoup period, they're not actually in $150,000 profit. They're actually just broken even at this point, and the dev has made lots of profit. So this is why this is somewhat rare because you are putting the risk in on the money, technically. So you should be able to recoup, at least that's the argument made. Variable recoup. This is getting a bit more common, which is nice. This is basically you recoup at a higher rate, but then you go to a lower rate as soon as you recoup. So this is pretty normal, to be honest. Platforms, funds, publishers, most do this, I think. And it really just depends on what the amount is. Some start at 100% and then go to 50. Some start, 100, then 50, then 30. Some, have different mechanics. So let's have a look. So this one's slightly more complicated, but it still should be easy to figure out. So I'm assuming that the funder takes 70% from day one until they have recouped $150,000, and then they go to 50%. So here, with $100,000, the funder is entitled to 70%, and the developer is entitled to 30%. That then flips once this recoup hits 150. You'll see it start to flip 50%. So let's try that. So fairly standard up to 100. But as soon as the game has made $150,000, it starts to change. So you can see here the dev is now in $82,000 profit. The funder is in $18,000 profit, but it has made its recoup. So its risk is now mitigated. It's no longer in the red. It is now starting to make a profit too. And then from then on, it's just 50-50 and so forth. At this level, if it just stopped at 300, the dev is happy, $107,000. Publisher might be happy. $43,000 is not a lot of profit on a $150,000 investment plus, the time that they take. But the unhappiness of this bit gets lower and lower the more that, money the game makes. This is only really statistically relevant at this low level. If you can imagine, this is $3 million. These are much closer together because it's only the 150 that's lacking, or even less than 150. Okay. So 100% recoup. This is all the revenue goes to the funder until the funder's initial investment is recouped. Once that happens, it changes to something else. So platforms, funds, and publishers. This is pretty common. I think the 100% is more common than the 70% example there. This means that you have that panic period at launch. You launch your game and you're not earning any money until the publisher has recouped. That is very important for you to understand. Very, very important from a business development and a company strategy and a not having to fire your staff 2 months after launch if your game doesn't succeed. So 100% of the money will go to the publisher until it reaches 150 and then it splits. So you can see first 100 goes over, second, the next 50 will go over to recoup, then it starts to split. There we go. So dev, 75K profit, publisher, 75K profit. This looks fair on paper, and it is fair on paper once you look at the numbers. Okay, they've recouped their money. That's fair. They have 75, they have 75. That will continue to be an equal partnership from there on. However, the developer at this point, if the game only makes $100,000, or let's say the investment was $1 million and it makes only $1 million, the developer hasn't made anything. They've been selling copies of the game and they haven't made anything. And this is somewhat normal. So there are mitigation strategies. Your publisher might continue paying your salaries until you break even or so forth. But this is potentially a problem for lots of studios. What this usually means is studios pitch their next project before their current one ships to try and avoid that gap in payments and revenue and so forth. But I don't love this, but I'm okay with it. Sometimes it depends on what the publisher is doing and how active they are and really how good they are at their jobs. So we'll go into that a bit later. Okay, this one is the most polarizing, I think, mostly because it confuses people. So I'll do my best to explain it here. So only the developer's share of revenue pays off the recoup until the funder's initial investment is recouped. Once that happens, it splits to something else. This could be disastrous for the developer. I will try and explain why. This is usually old school, old companies, companies in the 90s, etc., but it still exists today with some popular indie publishers. It is the one thing I think is my most hated part about publishing is mechanics like this. So 100% recoup from dev share. What does that mean? That means that the publisher is only recouping from here. They are not recouping from net revenue. What they are saying is, well, we are entitled to 50%. 50% of this is our share. 50% of this is the developer's share. So our 50%, you will see, goes into profit because that's their share. That's the dev share. Their recoup is based on the dev share. Now look how disastrous this is. It takes $300,000 worth of net revenue sales before the developer even makes a penny. They will make 50% on the next copy of the game, but up to 300,000, assuming an investment of 150,000, they don't make anything. The publisher has $150,000 profit, and they've recouped their 150,000. Now, the most dangerous thing about this model and where developers can get caught out and why you will hear developers say our game sold millions of copies in the 90s, but we never saw a penny, is because if you work backwards from this, it really means for every dollar that the funder spends, the game has to make $2. And that $2 gives the funder $1 profit. The other dollar goes to recoup. So let's say you're at $300,000 and you have a contract which gives your publisher free reign to spend what marketing funds they think they should spend on the game, and marketing is recouped at the same rate as everything else. They could go, cool, we're going to spend $50,000 on marketing at this point. Now the game has to make another $100,000 before the developer earns anything. So add 50 to that. Let's say it makes $100,000. The publisher has another 50K profit. They're at 200, and the recoup gets another 50K. It's at 200. Suddenly they have $400,000 for a spend of $200,000, and you still have nothing. So this is confusing, and I think it's supposed to be, but it's very dangerous. So please look out for it. I know I will get hated at by certain publishers for talking about this stuff. I'm not even kidding, but I think this is important, and I am yet to be convinced as to why this sort of model makes any sense whatsoever for any developer. Again, if this is the only way to get your game made, that is up to you as a creative, but I would urge you that there are other options, at least. If there are no other options, it is up to you. I'm not going to sit here from a place of privilege and tell you what you should do and what you should say no to, but my advice is to try and avoid this if you can. Sorry, that was a lot of numbers, and I hope that made sense. If not, please just tweet me. So one more thing, let's talk about platform deals. None of this that I'm about to talk about is leaking anything. These are hypotheticals. This is mostly me just using experience to talk about certain things. So not all platforms are friends. You might not know, but you can go and get an exclusive deal off a platform, or do a Game Pass or a PS Plus deal, or an Epic giveaway. Like, these are not secrets that these deals exist, and they exist only for certain devs and for certain games. But let's just say you have a game which is kind of going down this path. Doing a Game Pass PC deal could mean that you can't do Stadia, or you can't do Epic on day one because of exclusivity rules on each platform. Doing an Epic exclusive could mean you don't get to do Xbox, or you can't do Stadia. Like, it depends what's in the contract. And therefore, doing an Xbox exclusive probably means you can't do Switch or PS4 because it's against other consoles. It depends on what your deal is and what you're talking about. So just be careful when you go down this path of doing a console deal, and try and map out what that means for all the other consoles and work backwards from it as what is your launch plan. So you can match console exclusives with PC exclusives. So as long as it's not Stadia, probably, maybe, I don't know. I'm quite out of date on this point, because this is actually, I think, no longer true anymore. So rather than just being a confusing mess of words in this slide, the point of this is to show you that things change constantly. Build out your own little matrix, ask the platforms what they're exclusive against, and try and figure out what that means. So you can stack. You should stack. Maybe you take an Xbox exclusive, which is PC and console, and then maybe you get a Stadia giveaway 6 months later. Maybe day one looks like launching on Xbox console as a console exclusive, and then doing the PC platforms. You do Steam, Windows 10, you launch on Epic Game Store, not as an exclusive, just as a game. Like, that seems pretty good for a day one launch. And then month 3, month 6, whatever, whenever you're allowed, you can do Switch, PlayStation, Stadia, Luna, and so forth. So don't look at these slides and say, this is how I should do it. Look at these slides and think, cool, I now know that you can stack these. It's difficult. It's maneuvering through a minefield of platforms and what they might want. Just ask other devs, ask the platforms themselves, try and be transparent. Tell them if you're planning on getting a PlayStation exclusive, because then they can counter offer, or at least they know it's happening. So pretty important, but definitely something to focus on. Again, requires you to have a game usually that they might be interested in. Final thoughts. So money is not everything. Steam, like a Valve and Nintendo, are going to give you a bunch of money to do day one? Probably not, but that might be exactly what you need as a market. Sim shipping on all platforms, or focusing on Switch or Steam on day one, is not a bad idea. Sometimes taking money to be exclusive can be a bad idea, and that's a decision you'll have to make, that basically every biz dev in the games industry has to make at some point. Many indie publishers are terrible. I'm going to be real. Like, that's not most, I don't think, but there are many indie publishers that are terrible. To be an indie publisher, you need some capital behind you. That's it. That's basically it. I could start an indie publisher tomorrow, right? Am I going to be a good indie publisher? I would hope so, but I don't have to be. So don't blindly trust, I think, is my point there. Don't blindly trust. Ask around, like I said earlier. Gonna hammer that point home. Publishers and funders and investors, platforms, people like me, primarily, we're not your friend. This is a business of games. I care deeply about the games industry. I care deeply about helping indie developers and helping people to succeed. Does that mean 100% of what I do is philanthropic and charitable and is only done to help other people? No, of course not. I'd love to be a morally rich and then buy an island and retire. The only way I get to do that personally is by not being an asshole to developers and going through my career in a way that doesn't burn developers. But not everybody has to do that. If people plan on staying at the same company for 20 years or so, then it doesn't really make a difference. So this is a controversial slide because they are your friends. They can be your friends. I've got friends who I know are watching this, but ultimately when it comes to contract negotiation and deals and money changing hands, treat it like a business opportunity. Certainly work with your friends over people who aren't your friends if that helps you trust them more, but make sure your contract and negotiations are still done properly. Okay, services. There's some more slides. I'm sorry. Psych. So rev share, recoup, etc. are meaningless on their own. We've just talked a lot about like how does the money change hands, what goes where. There's so much more to publishing a game. Kowloon Knights are not a publisher, as I said, so we do not publish games. We do not provide services. We are not putting our name on them and so forth, but most publishers do. So let's talk about that. Here's a range of services. I don't think it's comprehensive. I don't think it has everything, but this is as much as I could think of over the past few months. So QA, that's sometimes done in-house. It's sometimes done by someone like Keywords and paid for by the publisher. Porting, again, sometimes done in-house. Sometimes that's using Blitworks or Play Everywhere or Quantum Astrophysicist Guild, so on and so forth. Localization, again, Keywords maybe, or sometimes done in-house. Sometimes the publisher will have their community help. It's important to know the quality of those localizations and what you're paying for and what you're getting. Localization isn't just lock too. It's not just translating. It's LQA. It's doing the QA on those localizations. When you translate words into German, are they, spreading outside your bounding boxes and text boxes? When you translate into some other languages and Unicode can't handle bits and pieces, what does it show? Does it show nothing, or does it show the symbol? I think it's a taco or something. The symbol that is for to show a missing Unicode letter. VO, usually they don't do that themselves. They're not voice actors, but they'll pay for voice actors and usually have agreements with unions and have favored voice actors and things like that. Age ratings, they might submit all your age ratings for you and do all of the long work of describing all the violence and sex and nudity and things in your games and trying to keep the age rating low as possible without lying and without being disingenuous. It's a lot of work there. Submissions is a lot of work. Every new platform you add, even the Epic Games Store, is however easy it is to use. It is a lot of new assets. It's a lot of clicking buttons. It's a place to update the game and so forth. So sometimes publishers will take that on. Production, they might have internal producers who are helping you as an external producer. There's a huge quality difference in how those producers approach it and how the publishers approach it. They go all the way from, not really quality difference, sorry, just engagement difference. They go all the way from a producer kind of being an internal producer to the developer and like helping them and then liaising with the publisher, but being paid for by the publisher, to the producer just being somebody from the publisher who checks in every month to get a build and rate the milestone. Dev kits. So they can get you dev kits. You can get your own dev kits, but they might pay for the dev kit, so you don't have to pay outright. And even Switch is cheap, but not really cheap, depending on what your budget is. Platform deals. Anyone can get you a platform deal. I've got to be real. You can do your own platform deals. You can just ask for intros to the platforms. If the platforms are interested, they will offer you a deal. You don't need a special relationship here. Does it help? Yes. Like, don't get me wrong. I know exactly who to talk to at Sony, Xbox, Stadia, etc., and what they usually look for and have the context for that. I think my point here is this should be the bare minimum a publisher can do. They should have all these contacts and know what they fund and why they fund and how things stack up. So just be wary of anyone who says that business development platform deals are their like biggest thing that they do for you, because really everybody should do that. Event presence, RIP. Marketing is a huge one. Is that Twitter ads? Is that Facebook ads? Is that TV spots? Or is that social media and community and engaging and putting out memes? It's all of the above and more. It really depends what that looks like. Press. You might need press, you might not need press. That's a whole other talk. But usually publishers will have a pretty good relationship with press, know who to talk to, which locations they should talk to them, or have PR agencies on hand. That can be one of the harder bits. Press and marketing, I think, are actually where publishers should be the best, because that's sometimes most difficult as a small developer. Focus testing, if they have large communities, they might have a smaller group of that community to play games and test bugs and just give feedback. That's pretty cool. Community, full stop. Do they have Discords? Do they, like Devolver, have hordes of fans willing to buy whatever Devolver puts out because it's usually of a high quality? Maybe, maybe not. Are you handing your potential future community to a publisher? Socials, social media, how do they do on there? Doesn't matter. Don't know. Maybe, probably, certainly with the community, but in terms of selling pure games, again, probably, but do you want to do your own socials, or do you want to have it all run by your publisher and the brand? Analytics, something you would hope every publisher would do, which is doing biz ops, min maxing your sale prices and so forth, and changing things based on what players are doing. Market research, less important, I think, but useful. Most publishers do market research and look at comparables, etc. Sales support, again, that's kind of analytics, but they should be making sure they are in every single sale possible, if that is their strategy, and not missing sales due to missing the email, etc. Awards, submitting for awards takes a lot of time. It's arguable whether it increases sales of the game, but it certainly is nice to win awards and get recognized by your peers, so I think it's worth doing. And dev resources, some publishers have in-house developers who can co-develop and help port and fix bugs and so forth. The fewer of these that your publisher is doing, not what they say they will do, the fewer of these that your publisher actually does, the less percentage you can give them. If your publisher is doing all of this, and certainly some of them do, it's pretty great. That leaves you basically to just make the game, as long as that's what you want. So more on that, what should they be doing? I think in order for a publisher to, after recoup, take between 10 and 25%, they could provide a bit of funding, or provide maybe some small suite of services. That might be a PR agency will do all of your PR and marketing for free in return for 10% of revenue. Maybe that's fair if you can't afford to pay them. Funds, small ones like Super Hot Presents and to some degree Indie Fund, etc., kind of sit in here as well, where they just give money and then they're hands off and let you do your thing. 26 to 35%. So really, I'm talking about 30% there. That's somewhat common with some of the good publishers. They provide funding or provide a large suite of services, sometimes both, but usually this will be kind of one or the other. They'll be your publisher, but you have to make the game yourself, but they'll pay for everything else. That might be around 30%. 50%, up to 50%, both generally. They provide the funding and they provide a large suite of the services. Certainly once we get towards 50%, they certainly better be doing all of this, or at least most. And then more than 50%. Is it publishing if it's over 50%? Is it more work for hire at that point? I'm not sure. I think the only way that I would feel comfortable signing my game with anybody, with them taking more than 50%, is if they've funded it based on purely an idea from me, or if I'm using their IP to make a game and I think that is valuable enough that I will make good money out of taking only 40% or so. But there are arguments to be made that over 50% really isn't the same as indie publishing and everything else we've just been talking about. So worth keeping an eye on. Funding versus, I'm nearly done. I'm sorry. Funding versus services. So salary funding. This is to make everything very clear. This is, just making the game you're getting paid to do. So that's only the salaries are covered. This is assuming the dev will spend their own money on services or do it themselves. So they, they'll do their own marketing, they'll do their own ports, etc. Only services offered, like the PR and marketing company I mentioned earlier. So that's assumes the dev can pay themselves and their team. This might be a Devolver deal if that a dev is doing great and they're self-funded. Maybe Devolver's just like, hey, we'll just do the publishing for you. So that's just services providing. Salary funding plus services, that is very, very common for publishers. They will basically pay you to make the game and then pay themselves to do everything else, or pay agencies. Or salary funding and services funding. This is where a fund like Super Hot Presents or Kowloon Nights or Wings or one of the others sit in, where you get the game funded, but you also get extra funding to spend on marketing, PR, porting, all of those other services. So I know I've said a lot of things in this talk. It all comes with a lot of privilege and the assumption that you have managed to scramble together a prototype with your colleagues and peers that is wanted by a publisher or a platform. Here's me and my team, some of our current and past clients. There's around 6 of us who are work very closely together on most of these, and then most of the bottom row, other than Kirsten, are kind of collaborators that we work with every now and again. Anna Sweet on the bottom there is CEO of Bad Robot. Ben does a lot of investment. Alex is a scout at Modern Wolf. Will is head of business at Splash Damage. And so the idea is that if we need to collaborate on a project or help a certain developer, or I need experts where I don't have the expertise, there's other people we trust and know and have kind of working relationships from the past on. And then the core team is myself, Gwen, Ranjani, Flip, Felix, and Kirsten. And we tend to cover most of the accounts and work together. We're busiest right now, mostly, I guess, with Inner Sloth on Among Us. Superhot is very busy. Bone Loaf is always very busy with Gang Beasts. But we have a policy of not wanting lots and lots and lots of clients. We prefer kind of a smaller number of big, exciting clients where we can do lots of interesting things. Thank you. That was longer than I'd planned, I think, maybe around 40 minutes, but I hope you enjoyed it. Some of you might have seen me talk about bits and pieces of this before, but I truly believe this is the most rounded version of this talk. It's the most up to date. And I think my final message would be publishing can be really, really great and unlock abilities for you to make games without worrying about paying yourself or, working weekends and evenings. But just be careful, I think. Be careful and recognize that if you're being offered a publishing deal, you have something that publishers want, and it's probably worth talking to other publishers. Again, being transparent with people you're talking to and seeing what else is out there. So feel free to email me any questions. I'm drowning in email on a daily basis, so it might take me some time to reply. I'm usually faster on Twitter. You can see it in the bottom right, but otherwise, I'm glad to finally speak here. I was meant to speak a couple of years ago and didn't make it out. Unfortunately, this one's online, but hopefully it provides some of the experience of what I hope to give you in person. Thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear us, Callum?
Hello. Yes.
That was a great session and a lot of very useful information. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
And we do have a few questions, so here we go. From Daniel, what does it take for an email game pitch to attract your attention in the inbox?
That's a good question. Floating around the internet, maybe I'll tweet it today, is what I would call like the perfect email. It's just an email that has had care and attention put to it so that it has most of the things that you need in there. If there's a GIF or an embedded video, that's really great. Tell me who you are, what game you have, what budget you're looking for, what you're looking for from a publisher, maybe a download link to the game and a video, and that gives me everything I need or anyone needs to go and just check it out. I can't answer that question from the perspective of somebody that needs emails to jump out at them. Like, I do read every email, so it's not like you have to be noticed with a flashy subject or anything. But it's definitely just easier to handle emails that have all of the information succinctly and easily, and that it either means a fast no because the budget is too small or too big, or it's just the wrong type of game, or it's an easy way for me to see what I need and progress to like setting up a call or something without a lot of back and forth. So I think email in general, for anybody who's busy, is just trying to remove having to email back and forth, and so just make it simple. But I don't think it needs to stand out or anything. It just should have everything in there.
Great. So other question, some developers choose to go with a publisher in order to get an exclusive deal with platforms such as Stadia or Epic because they are lured by exclusivity money. And because it's sometimes hard to reach people from companies like Stadia or Epic, but are exclusives worth it?
Okay, let's unpack that question. I don't. It's hard doing these questions because I can't ask you what you mean because I assume you didn't write the question. But the the thinking that you need to go to a publisher in order to get a platform deal is just simply not true. Um, is it harder? Maybe. You still need to know like who to contact and what they might be looking for, and be able to pitch to them and so forth. Like, there's definitely knowledge that could keep you back. But even, Gwen on my team, she heard a game doesn't have a publisher. They did a deal with somebody. You don't need a publisher to be able to do deals with people like Stadia and so forth. If it's kind of the same as the way I look at it is, if you have a game that is interesting enough to a publisher, and a publisher is interested, or the multiple publishers are interested, that game is also going to be interesting to a platform. So to answer the first part of your question, the statement that many people go to a publisher in order to get a exclusive deal, it seems like a backward way of doing it to me. I definitely recognize that there's privilege in knowing who to talk to. But that is why organizations and people like KOWLOON exists, to be able to introduce you to people, or to ask me to introduce you to people, because ultimately it comes down to the game rather than who you are. Second answer to that, is it worth it? Sure. I have nothing against exclusives, right? Like, if it's a difference between making the game and not making the game, or even if you could make the game either way, but an exclusive gives you a year of runway after you finish the game and covers the budget, like, that seems like a pretty great deal for me. And so it's really important to figure out what it is you want from this game, and are you limiting potential sales by going exclusive with somebody? Probably. Are those sales meaningful enough to turn down an exclusive deal? Maybe, but that depends entirely on every different game. I think exclusives are, anything where you're getting paid by a platform, ideally non-recoupable, is a positive for me, depending on the title. But especially if you're a smaller, it actually works slightly differently. If you're a big company, the amount you can get for something like Game Pass probably has limits on just what is a sensible amount for Xbox to pay for. But if you're a small indie, then you might be getting smaller amounts, but compared to your average revenue, it might be pretty good. Two, three, $400,000 could be really meaningful to a team. It could be the whole budget of a game. To a large company, it's not so meaningful. So I think it entirely depends on the game and the team, and what budget you put in, and what you're looking for afterwards. If it's stability, or if it's rich and fame, or whatever it might be. I think it depends, but yeah, I would not turn my nose up at exclusives, or any sort of platform deals. They're very common.
Okay. And so a question from me, and I asked you this separately, but I think it's still good to ask it live. When do you feel it is okay to accept above 50% rev share for the publisher after recoup?
Okay, so after recoup, just to be clear, so that's once the publisher or funder has regained all of their financial investment, and so you're asking what would you end up on, and when is it fair if that's less than 50%, as in if the developer is taking less than 50% of the revenue. There are occasions where this is fair, right? And again, it entirely depends on the game. But my personal take is, it's not really fair unless it's work for hire. So unless you're making profit on the actual rate that you're being paid for by the publisher, which is, a work for hire model, we'll get paid $10,000 a month per person, and we'll pay, $4,000 a month per person, or whatever it ends up being. In that situation where you're getting paid a profit, and you're making money on the actual work itself, then it becomes a work for hire, and a rev share is possibly even not relevant there, right? If you think of porting studios and so forth, they make their money purely on profit. They sometimes get rev share, they sometimes don't get rev share. I know there's definitely deals that can be done where a company wants someone to build a game out of their IP, whereas still the game developer is putting all of the design in, and it's their game, but they're not really creating something. They're not creating a new IP. They're using existing IP. I would also point to those as where the model looks a little differently. But I honestly would struggle, and would love to know about deals where the developer is getting less than 50%, and they're creating an IP from scratch, and they're not making profit on that dev work. I would struggle to think of a way that makes that is fair.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean it
licensing
doesn't make
scenario.
sense because yeah, licensing. I mean, yeah, that's the other problem, right? If you have an IP holder and a publisher and a developer, you can quickly see your revenue share being squeezed, right? Because there's 3 companies involved now, and if the IP holder wants, 10% and the publisher wants 50%, suddenly you're down to 40%. So like there are definitely mechanics where it happens, but I don't really think it's very fair. And yes, often it's the argument of you either get to make a game and work in games or you don't, but it doesn't make it fair. It just means that it happens sometimes. So yeah, I struggle to find a reason that dev having less than 50% is a good idea.
Okay, and the last question. So prototype funding deals, what are some terms that you think make sense in this scenario?
That's a good question. I rant a lot about prototype funding because I think lack of prototype funding is one of the biggest gatekeepers in this industry, honestly. In order to get a publishing deal, you need to have a prototype, and in order to make a prototype, you need time or money or team or help to make a prototype. And so many teams and games just never even form because they can't get to a prototype stage in order to get pitching. There are a few companies that do it. Humble still do it, I believe. KOWLOON has done a few. The platforms used to do it more often. I don't know if they really do it anymore. It's definitely rarer than it should be, though. There are organizations like the Pixels in Montreal who offer prototype funding, and sometimes local government, etc., offers prototype funding. In the UK, there's the UK Games Fund, there's the Island Screen, Victoria Film Fund. So it's out there, but it's rare. As for fair terms, it really depends on who the partner is. If it's a publisher doing prototype funding, usually the terms will be right of first refusal once the prototype is finished, and you agree an amount and deal terms for after that point. So you're basically saying we're going to fund this whole game, but we'll have a milestone before, after the prototype is finished, and then if it passes, we'll continue paying. And then usually, if the game fails, the dev has to find funding from elsewhere, and if they find funding from elsewhere, the new funder has to pay the old funder back. I've seen everything from just pay them back to like 3x. It really depends on what the business model is. And if the game never gets made, some companies make it a studio debt, so you have to pay them back from other games. Some don't make it a studio debt, and it's just, it's fine. If the game doesn't get made, it was just, an investment that didn't work out. And sometimes if the game is self-published, there's a lower multiplier for paying it back. But generally with prototype funding, the idea is that you try and reduce your risk by allowing yourself to get paid back if possible, but you're fully accepting that it just might not work out, and you can move on from there. But I really hope we see more and more prototype funding happening. It's just it's definitely a lot more risky than doing it otherwise.
Understood. Callum, thanks a lot. Very informative. I invite you to stick around on Discord and Pine to interact with the developers, and hopefully in next year or some future edition we'll have you live or in person on stage.
Yeah, I'll make it someday.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Callum.